The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. Life offers only one guarantee, and that is it will end. Greg Barnsdale knows this well, and he wants to warn you to not ignore your own mortality. In fact, the name of his book is Do Not Ignore Your Mortality, which is a guide filled with practical advice. Barnsdale says, having your final affairs in order helps reduce the stress of aging, leaves survivors more financially and emotionally resilient, and creates more meaningful legacies. The process often benefits charities, and it takes immense pressure off the courts from having to deal with so many unorganized estates. Collectively, all of these issues also help the economy. According to the Order of Good Death, people who are death positive believe that it is not morbid or taboo to speak openly about death. They see honest conversations about death and dying as the cornerstone of a healthy society. I invited Greg Barnsdale, the author of Do Not Ignore Your Mortality, to join me for a conversation that matters about healthy and practical planning for our own mortality. Greg, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Stuart.
Interesting title that you have. Why do you warn people not to ignore their own mortality? Is that because they do?
It is, yes. A lot of people I have found as I worked in the funeral industry and the financial planning industry simply didn't want to talk about these things. And I found it rather frustrating. But I think I have finally found a way that is resonating with a lot of people.
So, there really is this fear about saying, oh, I'm going to die. Most people, when you talk to them, the finality of it seems so much. But you talk about, if you do this properly, you help to preserve your own legacy. How so?
Well, we all are creating a legacy every day that we're alive with our children and family and friends and how we treat others. But I'm convinced, Stuart, that so many people just, as you said in your introduction, want to almost forget about the fact that life will end for each and every one of us. And from what I've experienced, especially in the funeral industry, I have seen all kinds of situations where people had their life change very quickly. Family members who would be wringing their hands in the arrangement office, speaking to me and saying, Greg, I just didn't expect this massive change in my life to happen like this, but it has. And what do I do now? But the greatest message I think that I can stress to other people is the fact that being prepared has so many benefits, as you alluded to in the introduction.
You know, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her book, Death, the Final Stage of Growth, basically says initially, the initial response is to try and deny that you're going to die. And then you get angry about it. And the fifth stage is that you accept it. What you're asking people to do is to move a few years earlier into the ending of their life and say, okay, start to prepare for this so that you have a clearer sense. So where does somebody start?
Well, the very best place to start, Stuart, is speaking with our family members in regards to what we want to have happen when we die. If we're thinking that we would prefer cremation over burial, well, our family members need to know that. But that is the very first step. But beyond that, it's crucially important that more people have a current and valid will. It's shocking that in such a society as ours, that only about half the adult population has a current and valid will.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. I couldn't help but think, you say, have a discussion with your family. What if your family goes, no, I don't want to have this conversation, because they don't want to face your mortality either.
Well, that's very true. I have, whether I worked in the funeral industry as a funeral director or as a financial advisor, talking with clients about risks to their retirement planning, and premature death would certainly be one of them that I tried to bring up with clients all the time. And my clients knew that my background was a funeral director, so they knew that I was passionate about helping them to prepare in this way too. But you're absolutely right. I've had many clients and family members tell me that when they have tried to bring up these topics with other family members, they were basically shut down, and it's unfortunate.
Well, I think that's because, other people have much of their own identity invested in you, the same way that you do in others, and they don't want that to end. And so, before we get to the will and the financial part, do you have some advice for family members to be able to say, okay, I understand you don't want to talk about this. I get it. But, you have to face the fact that you yourself and everybody else at some point is going to be looking at the end of their days on Earth.
Yes. And this whole topic, Stuart, is more prevalent today, especially with medical assistance in dying being legalized in Canada many years ago. This is all part of the death awareness movement, or the death positive movement that you referenced during the introduction as well. And having these proactive conversations are so important. But to answer your question, I have come up with a list of proactive probing legacy questions that I offer to people free. I'll email them to them if they contact me through my website, donotIgnoreYourMortality.com. I'll send them this list of my top 30 questions, which breaks it down into 15 basic questions and 15 more advanced types of questions to help get these meaningful conversations moving productively.
Okay, give me the top 2 or 3 questions.
Okay, here's the first question on the basic, out of the basic category. Did you know that end-of-life planning reduces the stress of aging? Well, I put that as the first one because I think most people don't realize that, but it truly does. We can't change the fact that we're going to die, but planning around it gives us that peace of mind, knowing that our affairs are in order, which, as you said in the introduction, as I had provided to you, it actually does leave our survivors more financially and emotionally resilient. The second question is, have you heard of the death positive movement? The third, have you had a close family member or a close friend pass away?
It's interesting that you bring those up because recently someone who has been a part of my life from before I was born, she was my mother's best friend, passed away. And that's about 5 weeks ago now. And maybe 2 weeks before her passing, she said, you got to come and see me now before you go on vacation, because I had a scheduled vacation. Okay. And she had told me a couple months earlier that she was 91 years of age. She had stage 4 cancer and she was going to die. And she was quite matter of fact about it. And I said, well, how are you feeling about it all? She goes, I'm fine. I've had a good life. I'm ready to go on. And so went to go see her. She had tripped and fallen because she was on morphine and, fractured her back. She's sitting there in bed, big smile on her face. And I'm going, Shirley, how are you? And she goes, I'm great. These drugs are fantastic. And I said, well, you seem to me that you're doing great. I'll, when we wrapped up our time together, I said, okay, well, I'll be in touch when I get back in about 3 weeks. She says, yeah, if I'm still around, look me up. And she was matter of fact about it. And I'm going, you'll be around. And she wasn't. But that really comfortable, thoughtful conversation that we had, not just that time, but the time before, she was at peace with her own passing. And so what you're saying is, like, she had planned out everything. She had all her affairs in order, and it made it very easy for her to just sort of go, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
Great story, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. It's a very appropriate story, Stuart, for this conversation. And it makes me think about the training that I had as a hospice volunteer. I have wanted to be a hospice volunteer for some time, and I took the training not too long ago. And that training was even further enlightening than what I had experienced in both the funeral industry and the financial industry, talking to people about end-of-life issues. But And that brings up another point. These hospices are in such need of people to come and help as volunteers.
So does that make you a death doula?
Yes, it does. Yeah, it's a new phrase here in Canada,
Yep.
and I'm quite confident the answer is yes, yes.
And so then what are the duties of somebody who takes on that role in somebody's end of life stage?
Well, the a hospice volunteer or death doula is really just someone to lend a sympathetic ear, to give the family some time so that they can go off and have a break from looking after the person that is dying, to get to know the person as an individual and talk to them or read to them and just spend some time with them, even if it's just quiet time. The main mantra of hospice is that no one should die alone, and that's something that I think is so appropriate.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. Okay, let's get to the financial side of this. So we talked a little bit earlier, or foreshadowed that we were going to be talking about wills. First of all, how often should you prepare your will or revise it?
Well, with the online opportunities today for updating all of our information, it should be much more than the old standard of every 5 years. I would say all these sorts of things should be reviewed every year or two. And these conversations with family members should happen somewhat frequently too. I would even suggest that at Thanksgiving, it's a perfect time to bring up these sorts of things with family, because we're celebrating, in a sense, what we're thankful for. What a great time to bring these up with family members.
So if you use these online tools, what's the legal status of those? Because I was under the impression that your will had to be notarized either by a notary public or by a lawyer.
Well, in some jurisdictions across Canada, holograph wills are actually legal, which are basically just in the handwriting of the person making the will. But unless you really know what you're doing, they're not recommended. Considering the importance of a will being the last document that really speaks on your behalf, seeing an experienced estate planning lawyer and engaging their services is the very best thing to do. But there is certainly a large number and an ever-growing number of online platforms where people can now set up a will on their own. But it's important to realize that there are cautions with that. And I took a great amount of time to properly explain that in my book, and all of my beta testers approved of it before I published it, because I wanted to make it clear that there are some risks that people need to be aware of before they attempt that on their own.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to financial considerations, how do you pull all of the different tentacles of one's financial life together? You say that you do financial planning, and this is something that I think that you really probably have to start focusing in on quite a bit earlier than even possibly setting up your will.
Yes, that's very true, Stuart. Everybody's situation is dramatically different. But in essence, the sooner we start this planning, the better. The sooner we start having these conversations with our family, the better. And as you pointed out, the order of the good death, I think it was that you had quoted perhaps from their website, these conversations should be much more normal. And it's all part of this death positive movement, and I hope it keeps continuing. But yes, the sooner we have these conversations and get looking at and considering all the different options, the better.
So do you need to give kind of advance notice to your bank or your investment advisor and anybody else that maybe has some like control over an account or money that you have, like who the person is that you've assigned to be your executor? Because I want to get to executors next, because I think that that's a bit of a tricky part of planning for your own mortality.
Yes, it is, Stuart. These conversations should be, in a perfect world, had openly with those fiduciaries that you're looking to engage to speak on your behalf. So whether it's in a fiduciary is just a generic term that I'm using, but it relates to the person or persons that you want to speak for you if you happen to be incapacitated and can't communicate. So that would relate to your power of attorney. If at the point of your death, the power of attorney no longer applies and your will then applies. So your executor should be aware of exactly what you want to have happen. They should be in agreement to act as the executor. So those types of conversations should involve those people well in advance to make sure that they're clear and willing to work in that type of role to help you.
Okay, let's talk about executor, because it's not uncommon for a lot of people to go, oh, well, my husband or my wife or my sister or my eldest child. And I have seen too often that is fraught with danger. What are the risks of assigning, the executor of your will's responsibility to a family member?
Well, there could be bias involved. There could be the most prevalent situation where people just are unfamiliar with the role. I often say to people that most would not want to act in the role of an estate trustee or an executor. They're basically the same thing, often enough to get good at it. And who would really want to do that?
Yeah.
So they're basically unfamiliar with the territory, and the bar is being raised all the time. Executors now can be sued personally for making a mistake, and a lot of people don't realize that.
Well, and in a family as well, if there has been some kind of animosity between siblings or between partners, or let's say they're at the time of death, they're engaged in a challenged separation or divorce, you're now asking one of those family members to step into the middle of that and take your side. That becomes really, really challenging, and it can tear families even further apart.
Yes, and nothing against lawyers, but lawyers' fees, legal fees in general, to sort out these things and air a family's dirty laundry in court is not only demeaning, but it can be incredibly expensive. And that's why people also need to be aware that corporate executors are a good option too, but they also help avoid that aspect of the disgruntled family members and the disharmony among families.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. Does a corporate executor, and I understand that there's a variety of different agencies that you can approach to have them take on that responsibility, is one of the other benefits of having an executor in that kind of position be that, like, let's say I assign my nephew to be the executor of my will, but he passes away, and I haven't renamed. Well, then there's a vacancy in that role. I haven't redone my will. Whereas when there's a corporate structure, there's going to be a handoff. If one person is now leaving the firm for whatever reason, there's going to be a handoff to the next person who's going to take on your file, and they assume that legal responsibility.
That's right, Stuart. They have that continuity to be able to continue on regardless. Corporate executors, corporate executor firms don't get sick. They're familiar with the rules of the jurisdiction that they're dealing in. They're very professional, and you're exactly right. Someone can step in if that main person isn't able to act. But speaking of that, when someone sets up a will or a power of attorney, we should always be thinking of setting up an alternate person or persons as well, in case that first person is unable or unwilling to act.
Now, you have made reference to the fact that you have been a funeral director in your career. That's one other area that people do not engage with much. What are the most important things, aside from do I want burial or cremation? How does somebody go about understanding the way in which you negotiate and navigate your way through the funeral process?
Well, that industry has changed a lot in the last few decades, actually. The the value that society used to place on a traditional funeral of a service within a church or at a funeral home and a procession to the cemetery has changed to such a degree now that some people do not even want to have a funeral. They may want to have a celebration of life or simply just a cremation to take place. So, as with most things, it's best to know what our options are. But you're exactly right, Stuart. A lot of people put off those types of decisions until they're forced to.
Well, I think a lot of people are also uncertain of what it costs to have a funeral. What kinds of costs are you looking at? Let's say you're looking at cremation versus through to a burial with a fairly elaborate casket in, the church to the funeral home. I imagine that the cost range is quite significant.
It can. It really depends on the services and the products and so on that are purchased. But the current cost for a very basic cremation right now across Canada, I would say, averages about $2,000 to maybe $2,500, and that's just as I said, the very basic cremation to take place and the very basic paperwork. But if someone wanted visitation, they wanted to have an open casket, they wanted to have some sort of a service, whether in the funeral home or at a church, well, obviously the costs are going to be much higher. And it also depends on cemetery property as well. If the family already has cemetery property, well, that does not have to be purchased.
What kinds of costs are you looking at when it comes to purchasing a cemetery plot if burial is your preferred method?
Well, again, Stuart, it depends on the location. Just like any realtor would say, location, location, location. The same applies to the cemetery industry too. So more rural areas will certainly be less than metropolitan areas within large cities, in which the graves will be more expensive. So to give you an exact figure, I don't think I'd be able to do that, but they certainly range immensely.
I've also noticed I've been to a service for someone who had been cremated, but the service was at a cemetery, and there was, in essence, a little, I don't know what you call them, a crypt, I guess, where you would take the urn and put it in there, and so you're looking at a small little, almost safety deposit box size resting place with the person's
Yes.
name and date of birth and so on. Is this helping families address the costs of the final stage of life?
It is, and what you're referring to, I believe, Stuart, is a niche wall, and we see them in more and more cemeteries all the time. The cremation rate in general has increased dramatically right across Canada and through the States and in other parts of the world too, primarily because it's convenient and the cost savings can be substantial as well. So the idea of placing the cremated remains or ashes within a small little niche within a niche wall is just a good creative solution for families to have a place to go and visit, and for the deceased to have some sort of memorial with their name on.
Well, Do Not Ignore Your Mortality is a fantastic guide that will help people hopefully overcome their hesitancy to talk about this and a plan appropriately. Greg, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.